What's up, guys? This is Trevor with the Action Item Podcast. I have Leo here.
Hi, everybody. It's Leo.
We're going to touch on some books that change the way we think about business, life, and finances. Well, with modern technology and nearly every bit of content that you think you would ever want to see on YouTube, it's kind of hard to justify the need for a book. But there is something about the retention, and for me personally, about when I read something, I think about it differently. It engages a different part of my brain. But if you don't like reading per se, Leo has some options that he likes. And I actually just read. I don't use any of these options, but I like the feel of the paper. I can't do the... Can you do digital books? Like, can you do the ebooks?
I think it's hard. I got to tell you. So, ebooks. I've tried it, and I've never really been successful at it. I kind of feel like maybe our generation is still a little bit more tactile in that we want to feel the smell of the paper, the book, having it somewhere, having a physical book, and then of course, having it to my collection. My wife, on the other hand, is an avid reader and has bookshelves upon bookshelves of books from her entire career. So
can she pivot to an ebook, or is it got to be paper?
She will not. Yeah, she's still. I will print out this 15-page document. I don't go that far, but I still have to have something to read in front of me. So, but I will say there's no shortage of knowledge online, of course, but there's definitely books out there, I think, and what we want to highlight is we are constant learners, and we talked a little bit in our very first episode about entrepreneurship and how not to to step outside of yourself and to understand that, you are not perfect. You are not the be all and all. You don't have to be the smartest person in the room. And what you should be doing, any entrepreneur and any business leader that knows their stuff knows that it's kind of like I know what I don't know, as kind of from the old philosophy, the Greek philosophy. So, keeping an open mind to and taking an opportunity to develop yourself, whether it's through reading books, like you said, or for people who have short attention spans, some of the apps out there that can take some of these publications for you into more digestible models is definitely the way to go and can make a huge difference, not just in your personal life, but in your entrepreneur, in your business, which, of course, the two are not mutually exclusive, right? This is your business. Everything about you is in that venture.
So my first book, and I was trying to explain this to Leo before we started the podcast. I don't know that the books that I have are something that taught me. The books that I've chose are more of a mindset. But the first book definitely does not fall into that world because it's The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. He's just a crazy-haired guy that says some really interesting things, and if you watch his TED Talks or any of that, they're usually quite insightful. But The Tipping Point dives into the concept of the tipping point. It's the moment when an idea or trend or a social behavior crosses a certain threshold and spreads drastically, and it creates like a new thing for a business. One of the examples that's used in the book is Hush Puppies. The Hush Puppy is the shoe. It's a shoe that's existed for like 100 years that nobody knew about, and suddenly some little clique in some little village in New York stumbled across them, started wearing them, and then everybody wanted to be like that little clique. And then it spread, and now Hush Puppies is a pretty massive sized company. And he dives into mavens, and that's a very important topic because it's people who actually set those trends. And from a business perspective, being able to sit down and look at who in your industry has the ability to create a tipping point in your business. Like for me, example, there was a lady that is a very popular real estate agent in my area. We did some work for her a bunch of years back, and she posted on Facebook how great we were. And her reach was only like 6,000 people. But the people that she dealt with, or the people that followed her, like hung on her every breath. She was a maven. And that was a change in my business. I wouldn't call that my business's tipping point per se. But that's what this book dives into. It teaches you what a maven is, what a tipping point is, and it helps you identify how to see that within your world. And I think that's quite interesting.
That is interesting. So is it about learning if I'm a, I don't know, I'm a consultant or I'm a CPA doing bookkeeping, is it about finding people who, I guess now the Maven is almost like an influencer?
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, it's just really like, is that what it's about, finding kind of like who those individuals are in your industry?
Yeah, and it's kind of like the old saying, lightning in a bottle. And it's hard to bottle up lightning, but if you know what you're looking for, then you can leverage it a little bit more than if it's just randomly happening. Like with Hush Puppies, they had no idea what was happening. They just suddenly knew that their business was growing. They didn't know what was going on. But if you can approach it from a proactive sense, you're a consultant in Los Angeles.
I'm a consultant. I am bicultural. I'm part of the Latino community here.
Yeah, so if you could find, if for example, for you, and you may be a Maven in your area, but to identify someone in your area that poses some value in that sense. And it's not that you're going to use that person, it's that you want to collaborate with those people, and that would draw interest to what you do.
Well, I think it's interesting. Like you use the example of Hush Puppies, which has been around, and I recognize them from a very long time ago as kind of the school shoes. There's no shortage of examples, obviously, of businesses leveraging celebrity them, influencers, and all of that but it's interesting because it's not always intentional. Like I'll give you an example. Converse, right? Everybody knows Cons, right? There's no, when I was growing up, this is now in the 80s, believe it or not, Converse was like the budget poor person's shoe. It was like, back then they were like $27. They were cheaper than most other shoes. Everybody wanted kind of the new Nike Air, or there was even these shoes you would pump air into. So there was this whole craze of athletic shoes, and Cons were considered the cheapo shoes. They were really they always been there. They've obviously been a very established brand, but not really mainstream, and were considered by many as to be kind of like, oh, these are the poor kids' shoes, right? They're kind of like, and around 1990, we started seeing hip-hop and grunge music scenes. We started seeing artists in those music scenes start to wear. Kurt Cobain for Nirvana, Ice Cube, back in the 90s. Suddenly, the Converse brand starts to blow up. And so by the 2000s now, Converse obviously is world recognized brand, continues to be, and even now to this day is almost kind of like a standard in anybody's wardrobe. But it wasn't always like that for the longest time. So there's definitely, I guess that was their tipping point, was when some of these mavens or these people of significant influence started bringing their brand to you. So I would love to read that book. I would love to learn how I could look at that type of strategy to see how that could benefit my company.
It's definitely interesting. What's your first book for us?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about a couple of books now. I read these throughout my corporate career, but I do feel that they've made a big difference in not only how I operate in business, but even in personal life. And so now I will say, I might have mentioned earlier, at full disclosure, I am not a huge book reader. And I wouldn't even have read these books had our company kind of not made us read these books. So, but the first book I want to talk about is by a gentleman named Patrick Lencioni. If you've never heard of Patrick Lencioni, he's a successful consultant, has his own consulting firm, and he has published several best-selling books, and talking about business management, but more so how teams and leaders interact with each other. And so the first book I want to talk about is The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. So Patrick Lencioni, his books are interesting. Instead of being a very factual nonfiction delivery, he tends to use kind of these fictional stories to prove his points or to bring his message across. So that's kind of the interesting approach. So rather than just a business book that's going to go over key points and what you do and how to do it, his are interwoven into stories that are fictional.
Stories work.
Yes, definitely. I mean, it's the, all throughout our entire mankind's history, right? That's how we impart knowledge to each other. I will briefly say his book is about you're in a team environment or a relationship, whether it's, it could be anyone from you and your spouse. It could be family. It could be a team, a corporate team, employee, employers. But in a team environment, there's 5 key dysfunctions to look out for. And he talks about how to manage them. And I'll briefly tell you what they are. The first one is an absence of trust. And so this is not the trust that you and I know how to predict each other's behavior or that we know each other. This is actually like full-blown trust. I can be completely vulnerable in front of somebody else. The second one is fear of conflict. And he talks a lot, and I have learned in my experience that people who are afraid to have conflict within a team, this is very dangerous because what happens is things don't get communicated. Important topics get swept under the rug. So fear of conflict definitely is very problematic and very common. The other one's very briefly a lack of commitment from team members, avoidance of accountability. That one's a huge one. And then the inattention to results. Every consulting engagement I've had since then, I see these manifest in the dynamics of the teams and leaders that I work with in different capacities. So I definitely highly recommend the book, especially if you're managing, whether it's an executive team or whether you're just, you've got 3 waitresses that you're managing at your restaurant, whatever that may be. The dynamics between people and the dynamics of a team, definitely, to me, it was career changing for me in how I approached leadership and team dynamics. And so I know you'll put links to these resources. Well, obviously, we're not affiliated or sponsored by any of these books. These are our own opinions. But and lastly, if you're like me and I can't get through 100 and some page book, you can actually find the 5 dysfunctions of a team as a YouTube video where you see Patrick Lencioni actually speak for about 45 minutes and does a lecture on these. So if you want to skip the book and get right to the point, he's a very engaging speaker. I think, grab a beer, grab a coffee, sit down for 45 minutes, watch that video. I think you will not be disappointed.
Some of those points I resonate with a whole lot. Trust is obviously that's a hard one. The fear of conflict, that's huge. You'd be shocked at how many business owners make very bad decisions. Actually, you wouldn't be shocked at all because most people would be shocked at how many business owners make very bad decisions because they don't want to engage conflict or they're worried. Overcoming that would be of huge value for a lot of.
I think it's a balance. As leaders, we need to know the difference. And I've seen this happen a lot. Oh, you don't agree with my plan. You and I are not on the same page. And I think that is false. You and I can definitely be on the same page. We are both looking out for profit, for the best interests of the company, for our collective success. We are on the same page. But we just may not agree on how we accomplish that. And so at the end of the day, what he talks about conflict is simply the search for the truth. And you have individuals from different values, beliefs, traditions, and experience who are looking at the same situation, same challenges, and coming up with the way they feel those can be overcome. And when you don't agree with each other, that's where conflict arises. But he's actually mentions he has seen a couple divorce, and he was like, they never fought. They never argued. They never had conflict. And it's interesting because in his mind, that was kind of part of the reason why they ended up divorcing. There's just no way you can be in some kind of partnership that long and not have conflict.
Got you.
So,
makes sense.
At some level. Yep. So yeah. So you mentioned a second book that you wanted to share, or
Yep. This one is Sway by Ori Brofman and Ram Brofman. So Sway, at its core, is a book about why people make irrational decisions. It kind of explores the psychological bits that typically would derail our normal logical reasoning abilities and lead us to make decisions that are illogical. One of the really huge concepts in there is loss aversion, whereas it discusses that people are more scared to lose something than to gain something. So this is why in marketing you see so much of a don't miss out on this special, a FOMO type model, because people are more.
What's FOMO, by the way? FOMO acronyms. There's so many acronyms.
Fear of missing out.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah.
For the non-marketers like me.
Sorry. So the people will gravitate to a something to not miss it rather than the model to market to them to gain it. And it helps with understanding the psychology of your customer. If you can understand the psychology of the largest percentage of your particular customer demographic, and you understand how that functions, it kind of falls into this bubble that me and Mike, my business partner, call social engineering. And that's essentially what the whole ball of wax is about. Not just Sway, but everything. Social engineering. Figuring out how people tick so that you can give them what they want. Not so you can take advantage of them, but so that you can actually give them what they want and satisfy their needs. And there's a balance. You got to satisfy their logical needs and their illogical needs. And this book kind of helps you think about things a little bit differently and put some science, psychology, factual information behind why people do things that we would typically consider are kind of dumb. It's quite
or irrational, right?
Yeah.
I was reading through the summary of the book. It definitely looks like an interesting read. So they explore kind of these dynamic forces about and they talk. I saw that they talk about the loss aversion that you mentioned, right, where we go to great lengths to avoid something that we perceive as a loss. And it's interesting because I think that there is that fear, right? And so loss and fear kind of go together. I think if I've worked with clients where I've seen clients that are reluctant to relinquish control of a certain aspect of their business. Now, this could be managing the finances. This could be, you name it, right? But there's this need to be part of that, and it comes from this irrational fear of that I am going to just absolutely lose control, and I have to be in control, and it becomes more about control and less about the benefit of the business, right? So yeah, I think this is definitely interesting. And then there was another thing that I thought was interesting is they mentioned diagnosis bias, which I have heard of before. And so what diagnosis bias is essentially is that we have a tendency to ignore evidence that contradicts our opinions or our take on a person or situation. And I'm like, holy crap, like that can get so much bigger. And I won't go into politics or things like that nature, but ignoring evidence that's contrary to your own opinion, again, is irrational, but simply because you're sticking to your opinion definitely is something that I've seen play out again. Kind of the one thing I tell people is you should never say in business is we've always done it this way kind of thing. So there's this way, like, no matter what you have evidence, like, well, don't do it this way. There's no, I don't want to change kind of thing. Like, yeah. So there's definitely a lot of unpackaged there. That would certainly be not only an interesting read on working with people in business, but your customers. Like you said, I think you hit the nail on the head of getting into the psychology of your customers. Like, yeah.
It helps with even interpersonal relationships. And it talks. I didn't mention this. I didn't put this in my notes, but and you said it when you said the talking about biases, confirmation bias. That is such a dangerous thing. I don't know. Have you?
What is? Spell it out for our listeners.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So confirmation bias is where I don't know that I can do it, man.
Well.
Okay. So
I'll help you.
Okay.
When basically based on your beliefs, you only see things and interpret them as long as it's consistent with your beliefs. Right? So when we process information, we are processing information and essentially it's not intentional. There is a bias of leaning more towards things that confirm the things we believe in. And when there are things that don't follow our beliefs, there's a tendency to be like, well, wait a second, this is kind of wrong, right? Would that be
yes.
acceptable?
And the where it fits into my world, and I think a lot of people's worlds, well, not a lot of people, but if I built you 5 sample homepage designs, and I presented them to you in a meeting and said, here's design 1, here's design 2, here's design 3, here's design 4, and here's 5, and this one's my favorite. I just put confirmation bias into play. If I leave that section out, now you are able to make a decision about which one you like without influence from me. It's kind of like, have you ever bought a car and you buy a red Ford Explorer and you don't never notice a red Ford Explorer on the road. But suddenly when you buy a red Ford Explorer, it's like, why are there
see them.
Yeah, why are there so many red Ford Explorers?
Right? Yep. Yeah, no, I mean, and this is reality. This is really stuff that exists that we don't see it. And I think it's almost kind of like a easy way to think of it is you put blinders on. The way we pick friends and partners, and I might go out on a limb here, but if you see a person that you just met and talk to them, and this person looks like the polar opposite of the people that you like to surround yourself with your life, right? No matter how good this person may be, if they don't really share your values and beliefs, and they seem to be really on the outlier of that case, of course, you're not going to be inclined to build a friendship with this person.
Oh, of course not.
I mean, right? So, and that is part of confirmation bias. And now, again, this person could be a great individual who's got a heart of gold and could be a huge ally for you, but, you probably would never give it a chance because it's like, nah, I don't see that this is right. So, I mean, again, it's just kind of a small example. Yeah, I could see that being, again, I think very helpful, particularly with customer psychology and of course, working with vendors, clients, and managing interpersonal relationships in business. So, and then, of course, that is one thing that when it comes to executive leadership, we talk a little bit about these type of biases. When I work with leaders, we try to go to a place of mindfulness and objectivity and of starting to try to step outside of those tendencies and those biases and those perceptions and try to look at things from as objective and clean a point of view as possible. It is definitely nearly impossible for a human because there's always some level of bias, but if we're self-aware and we're approaching things with an open mind, we have a tendency to maybe make better decisions.
Well, it's up to the presenter.
Right.
It's the presenter's responsibility to give the unbiased information. It's my job as the designer to say options 1 through 5 and leave off and not tell you which one is my favorite.
Right. That's
my job. You impart confirmation bias on people. So it's when we do it. I think a lot of folks will do it because they want to be right or they want to get the person to agree with them. But there's more value in getting that other opinion. That wraps up Sway. I think we covered that. You have a 4th book that is I've never heard of. What is that one? Because the title is quite interesting.
So the next one is again, this is a second book by the same author, Patrick Lencioni, who I mentioned, who wrote The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. He wrote a book called Death by Meeting. And, meetings are just a part of business. And I think a lot of folks in not just in corporate leadership, but in entrepreneurial settings, this is whether you're meeting with employees, whether you're meeting or touching base with your staff, other vendors or partners, right? Or a board of investors, right? So, meetings are just a part of something we do. So he wrote a book called Death by Meeting, which I use this to this day. It's a fictional story about an executive team and their struggles to get through a weekly corporate meeting, shorter than 2 hours, right? And so he talks about tactics that can really help you to, number one, make your meetings more concise, more impactful. So I definitely highly recommend taking a read or learning about it. I can give you kind of a summary of his book, and what he basically says is, to have a more effective meeting, he structures the meeting in a few different parts. Have a state of the union. If you're the business owner and you're meeting with your 3 employees or 5 or 50, you start with a state of where we are as a business. And then the people who directly report to you, you give them something called a lightning round, which is 2 minutes each to talk about their top 3 priorities for this week. So he's taking a structure and creating a meeting structure that will move you, and if you follow it, in fact, he suggests having a meeting kind of referee to keep the meeting moments. If you follow this, you actually can get through a lot of material. And I have seen organizations, I do these tactics with me, my client, and another leader, 3 of us. I've seen this same tactic move larger executive meetings of 30 people or more and keeping them to an hour, 50 minutes tops. So it's a great structured way to run your meetings. And look, at the end of the day, the faster you can accomplish what you need to accomplish in your meetings and engagements with your employees or vendors or partners, the more time you get back and the more you can accomplish. Because let's face it, we've all been in those meetings that get derailed. You go in circles. People try to resolve issues right then and there. And next thing you know, you've spent 20 minutes on the same topic. And, people aren't getting benefit from this meeting or people aren't contributing to this meeting. He really takes a structured approach where 1 hour tops, you can get through tons of information. And then he talks about when there are decision opportunities that need more time, don't do them in that meeting. Have a separate session for those. So it's it's a very good way to really kind of structure and keep meetings brief and short. And so I've adopted a lot of these tactics, and it's worked very well.
I've never.
It is definitely.
Yeah, I'm not in the. I've literally never been in the corporate world. Me and my partner have our meetings while playing X Defiant or Call of Duty.
There you go.
We literally have our daily wrap ups while we're playing video games. So I've never had the need for that. So I don't have a whole lot to contribute to that one.
You.
But I do know that. I don't know. I don't do meetings. I don't even do meetings with our team, our staff. It's everything's Discord, and you've actually got a little bit of an inside glimpse into some of that. So,
yeah, if and that's totally cool. If you don't need, for a business owner that has either recurring meetings or a weekly or bi-weekly staff meeting, or in any cases, like in my case, I don't have a huge team, but I do have 3 or 4 individuals that I meet with on a weekly basis to go through each of their respective areas. And these are essentially my direct reports. So, any business owner, it could be, when you're having a staff meeting, whether it's the restaurant, whether it's, a consulting agency or CPA firm. But at the end of the day, it's about keeping high efficiency and structure when you do have to have a meeting, right? I talked a little bit about myself. I'm not a huge book reader, but for those of you, I mean, we're all busy right now. We get that, especially entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, micropreneurs. There is no time to be reading these books. So the best alternatives that I have found and actually genuinely enjoy have been a few different apps that you can actually download on your Android or iOS or on your computer that basically take books like Sway or Death by Meeting or The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team or anything that's out there, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And what they do is they shrink them down to kind of the bare essential knowledge and kind of boil them down to the key points to help you learn the concepts that the author is trying to express. Now, are these a total substitute for the books? Probably not. But what you are looking at is you can take away the key points and knowledge that the author is trying to express in that book. So Blinkist is one of those. So it's Blinkist. They've got a library of about 4,500 titles and everything from management, psychology, investing, best-selling books. And so they will take a best-selling book and shrink it down and puts it into something that's digestible. And these things are like $12 to $14 a month, so usually there is a charge. But if you're like me, where in the evening as you're trying to wind down, maybe you have time to do a little bit of reading, I like to look at some of these. And I'm right now I'm reading about a book by a gentleman calling starting with why we always start with why, and kind of in business, like what is your why? What's your why? Very informative. And again, I'm not reading the entire book, but I'm getting all of the key knowledge. There are other apps that way. I think Short Form is another one they want to talk about. And I think the other alternative is called Headway. Headway is a big one. I want to say Headway was done by, I don't know if they were done by Headspace or not. I don't know if they're affiliated with Headspace, which is another popular app. But again, they take books, summarize them, allow you to digest them very quickly. So no shortage of these types of apps in your app store. My personal favorite is Imprint. What I like about Imprint is it kind of creates some visuals for you and animations, light animations. So it's almost like you're looking through those notes, cue cards with maybe some pictures and diagrams, and you're getting kind of the meat and potatoes of what you're trying to learn.
Those all sound very interesting.
So, and that's actually, I think, a good segue into this week's action item. For this week, what we would like for our listeners to do is to set aside, whether it's an hour, as much time as you possibly can. And while we've been talking about books here, articles, can be just as well, or even magazines like Entrepreneur can be just as well. I mean, but there needs to be time for your own self-development. There needs to be time for you to become a better business leader. This is only going to benefit you and your business. So I would say, if you're like me and you can do well with summaries, articles, things, then look at Blinkist, look at some of these apps. They have free trials. Take a look at them, and maybe just 15 minutes of reading a night. That's it. 15 minutes of reading a night. Learn something new about your business, or learn something new about your own personal development in business or in management. Or go ahead and take a look at some of the books that we've highlighted. Again, I think this week's action item is really focused around self-development overall. You as an individual and the business are not mutually exclusive. You are inseparable. So the better you are, the better your business can become.
Set aside 15 minutes a night this week for self-development. Read something, use what Leo said, one of those apps. I'll link as many of them as I could find down in the description. It really does help you grow your business, grow as a person. Before we wrap up, there's a book that I did not mention. It's Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, and it's probably the most pivotal book that I've personally read as far as mindset and me thinking about finances. The reason I didn't go into it is it's so common. I think a lot of people have read it, but if you have not read it and your finances are not where you would like them to be, it's probably a good one to add to the list. You got anything else for us before we wrap up, Leo?
No, that's it. I mean, I think, look, it's a shame you didn't mention that book. I haven't read it, but I think it's kind of ubiquitous and everybody has heard of it. But I have read some of the concepts from it, so I definitely do need to kind of go back, read through that. Maybe I'm sure I can find a summary on Rich Dad Poor Dad. Feel free to drop us a line and, hey, let us know what's your favorite publication, book, article, app that helps you with self-development or has been kind of game-changing or really has influenced your mindset in business. Let us know. We'd love to hear about it.
I want to thank everybody for keeping up with us and watching our content. See you guys next week.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.